4 days ago, we did a growing season fire in this little block of woods right behind me. And you can see some brown, the little shrubs and whatnot are browned up, but when you look up high, the crowns are in good shape of the more mature trees. There's several reasons why. Well, just think about a little baby. We talk about human baby, how soft that skin is, how everything's just right, and older folks like us, a little tougher skin. So a young sapling or a sprout has thinner skin, and a more mature tree has thicker bark. You know, bark is skin for trees. Well, it takes about 140 or 160 degrees at the cambium level, that's the tree's circulatory system, to basically collapse those cells or boil them and bust them open. They boil because of all the sap in there. Of course, the prescribed fire could certainly burn more than 140 or 160 degrees, but that bark is a buffer. It's an insulator, like having a pair of big gloves on when you pick up something hot from welding or cooking. So the thinner trees have thinner gloves on, if you will, and it's easier to set them back. My objectives of this fire was to clean out some of the underbrush or terminate those saplings, and this is a north-south running strip, so get that east or morning sun underneath there and try to grow a few grasses or forbs. This is basically a staging area going into the food plot. You may be able to see through the timber. And those saplings, they're thick for you and I to walk through, but they're not thick at where deer or turkey are. So just wanted to change that around. Had a good day. The temperature was right at 100 degrees and the humidity was about 40%. So those were the conditions we burned under. And you probably can't tell in the video, but that's slightly uphill. You can see that, where the food plot starts is probably hitting me about here from your view, and down here it's about knee tall. So in 30 yards it drops 2 or 3 feet, a little bit of a hill. And we lit the edge by the field, and then when I saw that was burning, I had the interns burn that, I would light a head fire here. So I tried to run a head fire through here to generate enough heat to take out those saplings. And when you're burning, there's not necessarily a magic calculator or recipe. I'm looking at flame height and how long that flame is standing when it goes by a tree. A head fire will typically be more intense, a taller flame, probably a little bit hotter, but it passes the tree quicker because it's moving uphill. It's a head fire, it's going faster, where a backing fire, flames are almost always smaller unless it gets in a big pile of leaves or a dead cedar or something. But its residence time, or the time it passes that tree, is much slower because it's just backing really slowly. Both of them can be effective. I find that head fires do a bit better job for me in the conditions here in the Ozarks and meeting my objectives of taking out saplings. Now, both a head fire and a backing fire are not very effective if we'd have done this during the dormant season. All the carbohydrates are down on the tree's root, just like a bear hibernating, so to speak. The tree's still alive, but all the food sources down the roots, just burning just enough to survive till it can get green leaves out and photosynthesize and make more food. But when we burn now in July or August, most of the carbohydrates or the tree's food is up in the leaves. And if you scorch that base of the tree, the cambium, it can't transfer those nutrients and carbohydrates that the leaves have been making back to the root system. And although the fire browned up the top, through the winter when that tree needs the carbohydrates to survive, that's when the tree is actually terminated, unless it's a catastrophic burn, the whole thing's consumed in fire. So growing season burns, you can tell, did not make these little saplings, half-inch of them, so fall over. It didn't consume them. The goal is to girdle the tree, get enough heat on that cambium, the inner bark of the tree's circulatory system, to collapse those cells or destroy those cells so the tree can't transfer carbohydrates from the leaves back to the roots, and that tree will suffer from malnutrition and perish later on. Now there's some other advantages. Remove most of the leaf litter, got that soil really black. Well, ticks have to have moisture, so I'm sure a lot of ticks desiccated and died. Probably everyone's clapping out there, killed a bunch of ticks, but this was a relatively small burn, so as deer pass through from behind us here to here, I'm sure ticks are gonna shed off the deer and repopulate this small area quickly. So we reduce the tick population here at Proving Grounds too, some, but not enough to matter. Rabbits, squirrels, deer, other critters will pass in and out of that area. They'll really be attracted to this area. Here, when we get a rain or two and it greens up and there's fresh forage in there, young saplings, young forbs, deer will be feeding in there. And of course, ticks will shed off them then. So growing season burns do a good job of reducing ticks. It's the frequency and the amount of area used that determines whether you reduce the tick population in the area overall. We're standing on a road right here, an inner property road, an interior road, and right across the road, we did a dormant season burn this spring. Daniel, Evan, and I burned a pretty big patch, about 50 acres over here. And I want to compare, saplings this size, and you can see behind me, to over here where we did a dormant season burn. I think that was in March or even early April, so just a few months ago, and compare the difference.
Growing Deer is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Also by Green Cover Food Plots, Winchester, Moultrie Mobile, Fleet Outdoor Apparel, Morel Targets, RTP Outdoors, Fourth Arrow, Scorpion Venom Archery, Case IH Tractors, Ward Laboratories, Burris Optics, National Land Realty, G5 Broadheads, Prime Bows, and Redneck Hunting Blinds.
Just walked across an interior road, literally, just a couple of yards away, a really easy bow shot. And again, this was burned pre-spring green up, so it's a little sapling right here. It's obviously looking good. You can see some stump sprouts or little seedlings coming up here, and right in front of me was a cherry tree, but you can see it sprouting back from the root. There was a bunch of fuel, bunch of sticks below there. Looks like it might have got hot enough there to girdle that tree, to interrupt the cells of the cambium layer, but it's just sprouting back because all that energy was still in the root system. There was no leaves up there storing the carbs at that time. So we took a lot of leaves out. My primary burn in here, I wanted to do a dormant season burn for the first burn because this area was just chock full of cedar. You can probably see the cedar skeletons around, a lot of fuel. And I needed that to escape up through trees without that layer of leaves holding the heat in. If we'd have done that burn with all that fuel during the growing season, we would have cooked a bunch of leaves and killed a lot more mature trees. Now, forest is still a little thick in places behind me, but now with all those cedar skeletons reduced by the fire, I can easily come back in and use the hack and squirt technique, and just like making a paintbrush on a big old painting, I can take out which trees I want and leave the trees I want. Where fire isn't that specific, you can use that with hack and squirt to put a little bit more sun on the ground in places. So I was really pleased with this burn during the spring also. Reduced a lot of fuel from the failed cedars. You see sticks everywhere. A lot of people think burns are gonna clean it up like a golf course. That's not the case unless it's a catastrophic fire, but it removed a bunch of fuel out of here. We can burn it safer in the future, and I suspect our next burn in here a couple years from now will be a growing season burn that will help set back a lot of these little sprouts and saplings, and there'll be a lot of grasses and forbs growing up in these cedar tops now that all the needles and the small limbs are removed, and we get more consumption of those tops. Got the ground pretty bare. I'm sure we reduced the tick population in here. I don't think we wiped them out by any stretch of the imagination, because there's enough structure still for ticks to hide out and not become desiccated. And a lot of these little sprouts have been browsed on. Mississippi State talks a lot about mineral stumps, and like this sprout right in front of me from a tree that was, here, I don't know, 5, 10 years old. It's got that big old root system, and it's pumping all those minerals and nutrients out of soil into a little handful of sprouts. Well, of course, that's pretty tasty. It's very rich in minerals and nutrients, and deer are very selective feeders. They know what they need. Inherently, they know what they need. So they're gonna pick on these plants. They're gonna eat the plants that are providing them what they need that day. And that's one reason we all talk about having very diverse habitat, so deer can find what they need. Oftentimes there may be a volume of food, but not what deer need, and it limits them expressing their full potential. So pleased with this burn because it had a different mission than the growing season burn across the road. and I'm pleased with the results of both of them. You may need a growing season burn to complete your objectives or meet your mission. You may need a dormant season burn. Both are very viable tools. I use both dormant and growing season in rotation to get the best habitat. A lot of states have prescribed fire classes. Those are really more about safety, and there's some universities, of course, Growing Deer, that hopefully are providing information about when to use fire. It's important to know the safety stuff before you ever drop a match. But once you get comfortable with that, you really want to not just use fire, you want to use fire to meet your objectives. And understanding all this, and almost all woodlands in America, certainly Midwest and Southern America, are what we call fire adapted. Native Americans and lightning strikes cause frequent fire, and scientists know that by studying the growth ring, the scars on growth rings of very old trees. Or I like to read, as I've shared several times, the early explorers. There was an early trapper, someone in almost every nook and cranny of America, North America, and there'd be a guy every now and then, there were usually men, that kept a journal, like Lewis and Clark, but on a much smaller scale. And oftentimes these people talk a lot about fire, and they note the date or the month it was in. So we have a good record of when fire occurred, and restoring native habitat should be an objective for most landowners. How can you do any better than restoring the habitat to what it was pre-colonization or pre-European settlement? That's going to be a very productive and natural habitat with species suited for that exact environment at that location. And understanding all that's a great way to learn about and enjoy creation. And in addition to reading those early explorers, I want to encourage you to read the Word and learn more about the Creator's will for your life. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.